Welcome to Matrix Tech Talk. So you mentioned what you're saying, that there has to be a mold where the system should say there's something wrong, some person should take control of the vehicle.
Yeah.
So when it comes to autonomous driving, we're talking about 5 levels, and the highest level, level 5, is no driver at all.
Yeah.
Driver should not, even General Motors even patented one design where there is no steering wheel. There is nothing, there's no way a human can drive that car. So in that scenario, it's such modes will be difficult, don't you think?
Yeah, then there will be no other chance than disabling the vehicle as such. So it says, hey, we encountered something really weird here. It's not behaving as expected, and then we cannot let it go.
Yeah. Then it's
or it can just go at very slow speed or something like that. I don't know, but it's always a matter of, well, in a vehicle with persons on board, there will be a matter of life and death probably, and that kind of consideration should be taken
in safety. We call it the safe state.
Yeah, exactly.
Put it in the safe state whenever such things
so
happen.
Yes, so there should be something monitoring what's going on inside that vehicle and judging whether we are still good to go or not. And just a type of baseline that should be known before you set this thing in movement. So that baseline has to be followed. If something deviates from that baseline, then we say, okay, this is now an exceptional situation and we should do that.
So yeah, that brings me to the topic of intrusion detection systems. So we have in the corporate world an intrusion detection system in place. So you can detect such anomalies. Let's put it this way. So how should an intrusion detection system work with a car? Do you think it's more the back end thing, or because in automotive, when we talk about automotive data, we generate, we don't gather it yet, but we generate so much of data, gasoline data, your torque data, data relates to the street. So these could be valuable data in terms of innovation. At the same time, you can exploit this data to perform attacks.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So how? What's your take on intrusion detection system?
And on the other side, you can actually use those metrics to understand what the baseline is, and then if there is a deviation. Just give you an example from the mainstream computer world, like mainstream operating system. If we take like the latest and greatest versions in Windows, for instance, the Windows 10, it actually measures your normal consumption of memory, disk IOs, CPU IOs, etc. So it has its own awareness about what's normal and what's abnormal for this user. Okay, you normally start this web browser and you do this and that, you consume this much of memory. So there is a baseline already known. So if you deviate from that one, we can instruct the system, says, hey, if memory consumption all of a sudden starts spiking and we start seeing an abnormal amount of memory being allocated, please terminate that process. So that metrics could be something useful to find the abnormal activity going on. We need obviously to collect more metrics. It's all about, the game is not more strange than that. So we need to understand what type of networking traffic we are supposed to see. What is normal, what is not? How does it look like? We need to do extensive monitoring to understand that baseline once again. There are different baselines to speak about. How much IOPS are we expecting this thing to perform? Is it doing something strange right now? Is there a reason? Is there a situation where, we encountered something on the road, we need to act, and then a lot of more IOPS are going on. So we need to start looking at all these different channels that exist. So the networking, one of them, the intra-communication protocols, something that goes within, something that goes external towards backend system, telemetry system, other type of systems surrounding us. So all of that should be like looked at, and then it's always a question about, okay, who should make that judgment? If we start gathering that much of telemetry, where should that go? And who's capable of analyzing that much of data all of a sudden?
On top of that, we have the GDPR.
Exactly. So there are a lot of questions yet to be solved about that. We don't really have, or we do actually have similar issues. Like today, the most advanced analysis systems that does the behavioral analysis, they are cloud-based. So you collect your telemetry, send it to cloud service. The cloud service will do AI-based big data analysis on it and tell you almost immediately what's happening and what you should do. So is that ever possible in a moving vehicle? Do we have that bandwidth? Do we have the time? Do we afford that, like the latency for that computation time?
Yeah.
And how should we behave around that? So that means we need to bother more about building. As I said, there are no 100% secure systems, but we need to start bothering about more to like get as close as we ever can do. We probably have a very high percentage like level, but we still have some issues, but probably it needs way more advanced technique to exploit those issues. So that's a lot of investment. That's something, I mean, if you look at security software, that's the type of investment we should expect, right? So I would put that in comparison to the most critical components in the vehicle must be dealt with as if they are security-based systems. So we should do proper investment to get a hold of all these moving parts and then get them handled the right way.
So when it comes to automotive, I define the consequences of security into 4 categories. One is economics. We already talked about it. One is very, very important. You already mentioned it, is safety. The third one is availability, the operational. And the fourth one is privacy. So let's focus a little bit on safety issues right now, because some of the, like I said, the most critical components should be dealt with more care. It should be security-based system. Now, one question that when I work with my safety colleagues, one question that I get from them, when you do safety engineering, we usually say, okay, if this doesn't work, what happens? Now, the question is, when your security system does not work, you have to also take that as if there is a fault in the security system, what happens?
Normally in a high-end type of systems, if we speak about security wise high-end systems, if the security control system is failing, then the system will be stopped. It's not allowed to continue whatever it does. So if we look at the firewall, for instance, it says if you're not able to perform your audit logging, then you shouldn't let any traffic bypass. So that's a very typical scenario. A lot of security features, if you cannot perform that particular thing that is interesting for like auditing or traceability or wherever that could be, the type of requirement that must be there. If you're not able to perform that one, then you will not be allowed to continue the work you're doing. So I would put it at the same level. I would say if security is as critical, then if we are not able to monitor or understand or make our judgments about what's going on in the system, then that subsystem should be disabled. Yeah. So we go to the safe state and then says, hey, okay, that one, you cannot rely on it anymore. Then this will be put aside till we can get back to that state, we can control it again.
Love it. Hasain, you talked about your red teaming services that you offer to people. So I want to know a little bit about, what is the spectrum? Do you start from social engineering? Do you go all the way to as sophisticated as a nation state operation? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we actually we have the ability to cover the whole, from A to Z. So I mean, the question about nation state, it's a matter of time and investment and money, etc. But So what we can tell the customer, hey, if we had much more time than this, we would probably be able to do this and this and that. Normally we have a discussion with the customer just to see, okay, what kind of systems do you have? What kind of procedures do you have? How do you perform your actions? And then we can make our judgments from that. But we always start with, if it is allowed during the operation or the assignment, we always start with a social engineering force, trying to physically breach into the environment.
Why social engineering at first? Is it I want to hear your opinion. Why social engineering first?
The users are, or let me rephrase it. There is always a user who can access the system, right? So systems are not going by themselves. There is always an admin. There is always a user in the system. So if you can trick people to give you access one way or the other, then you will get your first foothold. Once you got that, you don't need the user anymore. So just one step in that direction, like any kind of thing that we can get hold of using that user. Like sending them an email and say, hey, we've been using the GDPR as a reason. It's one of our recent social engineering tricks. So we call somebody, hey, we're from company this and that, and we are conducting a GDPR investigation. This is a very high profile case, and then we have a bunch of questions and a bunch of actions we need to go through. And people are more than willing to answer those questions and perform the actions. We have a success rate of way above 90%.
In your social engineering scenario?
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So we do a lot of careful reconnaissance about what's going on with what kind of company, what kind of people there are. Social networks are very useful, like LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, forum sites, etc. So we do a lot of investment, and we maybe spend 1 or 2 or 3 weeks and looking at what do people of that company, what do they have for questions, how do they work, how many are working with this and that system. So just register a new LinkedIn account and then claim to be an employer at that company and start asking questions. I started my employment last week. Can you help out? People are very nice and easy, and they just, we feel sorry about you. Sure, we should help you. You can do this thing that way. You can do this thing that way, etc. So you will start getting more and more information, and then soon you start communicating with somebody, and after a while you will get more or less trusted as being actually an employer of that organization. So they will go ahead and start telling other things that probably not tell you at the first encounter. Spear phishing is obviously another way. So sending emails that says something about, hey, we are testing another new system and you have been chosen to evaluate that system, and then you need these instructions. If something looks weird, please call us at this number. And many times we do back up the spear phishing email with a call where we actually, if you look at the display on your phone, you will see that it's your company's phone number that is appearing there. That gives us a little bit more of legitimate type of, okay, these guys are probably my colleagues. They are calling, otherwise the company number will not be there. So all we're using is caller ID spoofing. Mm-hmm. Nothing fancy. It works everywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. People aren't aware of these facts. So you get a call, it's like the company number or something like that. Of course, you will not question that thing. Mm. At least not for regular people. So we use that vector a lot. Sometimes it works very well. Sometimes it works in limited time frame. So we have a lot of occasions where we actually managed to get somebody running our code on their computers, but they got some bad feeling about it, and then they called the IT department just to double check, or they wanted to double check and then figured out, hey, that wasn't really the right thing. But it's good enough for us if you just execute the code for 5 minutes. Normally we will approach different people different departments, maybe different parts of the world, if that's an international company. So we do the first attack or the first spear phishing on one part of the company, and then we collect some information. We now have more information about what's going on internally. So the next attack or the next try, we will use that information we collected first to dig for other parts of it. So we can do that like repeatedly 3, 4, 5 different times, and every time we're getting more information based on whatever we got in the first step. Until we reach somewhere we can actually establish a foothold without being kicked out or discovered. So that would be the ultimate goal. It's both testing that exposure, testing that channel, putting together the metrics. How difficult was it? Did we ever get any positive response? Did we get any foothold? Did we execute anything on that machine? When we were on that machine, were we like local admin or just a regular user? Could we eventually do something else in that scenario? So all of these are metrics we're going to use into building that table and telling, hey, you have very low sophistication level required to make your users reveal information about your internal systems. So it doesn't take that much of investment to use that exposure. So that's why the social engineering is always interesting. Physical intrusion is always interesting as well. Of course, you need to have your get out of the jail card with you when you do physical intrusions. So it's a matter of, once again, playing with the human nature. It's like approaching somebody, hey, either I'm busy talking on the phone, having my other hand like my suitcase or something like that, and then just tailgating somebody through the doors or the man trap or whatever they might have, right? So a lot of people will not start like pushing for a conflict. Okay, that poor guy, well, he's quite busy and he's talking to somebody, it looks sweaty, and okay, let's just make it easy for him. That's the classic human nature, right? So we try to use that quite a lot, just to get into the environment without being questioned or asked too many questions or something like that. So you might use like that small office. You don't go to the main office or the headquarters. The first thing you can do, you will target the small R&D office somewhere, and then university campus. You probably don't have that guard. You probably don't have armed guards at that entrance. It's just a university campus. It's fairly abnormal if they have armed guards at that office. They just knock the door. We obviously try to understand what kind of badge system they are using. At least it will look similar. So we print our own badges, mimicking the badges they have. So the type of whatever logotypes or the picture of a person or the naming, etc. So we try really to convince the other part that, hey, we do belong to this, the same way you do belong to this. To just knocking the door and then stepping in and everything looks fine. Of course, if we were targeting the headquarters or the main office, there will be somebody questioning and asking, why are you not using your badge? Why are you not using your card to like enter the building or something like that? So, but on a smaller office, you could just put whatever type of claims you would like to, and then nobody will almost ask anything about that. So getting physical access, and in those cases we manage to get physical access, we will implant a device in that network. So just to have it like a tiny device, Raspberry Pi or something like that, tiny enough not to be questioned by people. In most of the cases it will be like just underneath a table or something like that, or just behind the computer, and then we connect the computer through that device. So we will have, like, once we planted in a device, we will have a time to monitor what's going on with that computer and that network. So we will mimic the attacker's behavior, like sitting there, just listening in, learning what's going on. And then we take it off from there and start behaving similar ways. and just try to dig our way through their network defenses, if there are any, or just if we observe that there are not much of defenses, then we will start like going probably a little bit faster. So yes, the people behind the systems, the people controlling the systems, if you can get them to do whatever your intentions are, then you don't need to break into the IT systems as such. You don't need to find a vulnerability. If you can tell somebody, hey, please download and update, use that software to do something. So like looking at the car, there is an entertainment system. What if I can tell somebody, hey, please download my application because you really need it? Or this is a legit update to something. And they install that one on the entertainment system, which happens to be interconnected with the other systems because there is probably just one internet connection or one connection to the backend system, right? So Absolutely. What if we could jump between the two systems and start, or at least start studying what's possible, what type of exposure do we have to the other systems, and see where we can go from there. Many years ago, there was an operation called Eurograbber. It was targeting banks here in Germany, in the Netherlands, and across Western Europe. So what they did actually, they pushed out, using social engineering, they convince people, hey, this is an update to your one-time password authentication system, which your bank is using. So people convinced about that, they did install that update, which actually, it's not replacing the one-time password authentication system, but it was plugging into that one. So it was processing information in front of it. So when the user started typing in their one-time password, the first one went to the attacker system and got cached, and then automatically got used. And then the user was presented with an error message that said they had to type in the next code. So they got access to their banking system, but the attacker could do a number of transactions using the first code. They went away with, I guess it was 32 million euros or something like that, from that, just doing microtransactions on every account. So what if that is possible on
vehicles?
The entertainment system, the thing you see in your dashboard, right?
Well, your credit card information will be embedded to it because the car is not becoming, it's not only a car anymore, it's becoming probably your mobile office, mobile living room.
Your mobile phone is connected to it, probably.
Connected to it.
You're sharing information with your car.
Right. I mean, when it comes to fully autonomous vehicle, then it's not only your mobile phone. You'll be probably working or being entertained, watching Netflix or having teleconferences, many other things. You will be subscribing to services, localized services. So that could happen. Now, this is really interesting. Let's how do you think what this scenarios, the social engineering scenarios, may translate to hacking or taking control of your vehicle?
Well, it's fully possible. I mean, if we look at the backend systems, targeting the people who can control the backend systems, that's one valid option, obviously. So if you can get hold of those guys who are managing the backend systems, then you will get hold of the backend system itself. So then you have whatever, fleet members there are belonging to that backend system. So absolutely. And then on the other side, then if you're interested in a specific vehicle, a specific owner of that one or something, obviously targeting that person. And then it's a matter of, okay, how can we convince that person to do certain actions? If we're calling and stating that, hey, we are calling from your
vehicle manufacturer.
Exactly. So how are they going to behave? Oh, you have to drive by to get a firmware upgrade. So we give them an appointment, an address. It's enough if one gives you a positive answer, right? It depends on the type of action, obviously. But if you just want to target that particular person, you probably need to work on your messaging, and then to what degree you can convince that person that this is an authentic, true thing. So if you can make that person hand over the car to you, and you can implant whatever you would like to in that car,
you have it.
There is just another network in that car, right? So why shouldn't it be possible? It's already possible today to connect like devices, read the service bus information, etc. So, I mean, connecting something to the internal network in that car or in that vehicle shouldn't be that difficult if you know what you're doing.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about solution to these problems. So when you detect such vulnerabilities, be it through social engineering, be it through physical presence, or remotely, what do you usually prescribe your clients?
Well, it's a matter, we used to say, in normal IT systems, in normal IT environments, we say today that it is impossible to protect 100%. So what you should do instead is that you should implement protection mechanisms that makes life difficult for the attacker, so they get more noisy. By getting them more noisy, they will deviate from the baseline, and we should be able to discover them if we have enough detection capability. That's probably very difficult to implement in the car. As we were speaking about detection capability, logging, analysis, all of that. So instead of, we have then to rely more on the protection and more on the integrity of the system. So the system should be aware of its own integrity. So we probably need to rely on methods that are being used today to judge about, okay, the system still looking good. In terms of hardware, there are trusted hardware components that monitors for the system integrity. Like in normal computers, we have TPM or equivalent type of technology, the trusted platform modules. So these can be instructed to look at certain things, do certain measurements, and compare with a baseline. If that baseline is not correct, then they will try to stop the execution of something. They will not hand over the execution to the second step, etc. So that's probably something we need to start looking at or rely at more than the actual detection capability, because of the circumstances surrounding the detection capability. It's going to be a huge number of data. It's going to require connections to some outbound systems to get help with that, etc. I don't believe that we can rely on sandboxing systems such ways we do on regular computers. So we need to have more built-in monitoring. The hardware judges whether this is good or not. It's like an extreme whitelisting model rather than anything else.
So I have a question. The baseline concept and deviating from the baseline concept that you've mentioned. From your experience, how much of a false positive do you encounter?
Well, it depends on what type of whitelisting you're doing. If you're whitelisting certain binaries, let's start with the firmware. The firmware will not load unless it is signed certain ways. We know the origin of it. We know what's going on there. Everybody heard about the Tesla firmware, hijack or attack. So you could download a new firmware and the firmware origin wasn't checked, and function was there, but it wasn't enabled. So they got to enable that immediately when somebody is actually misusing that thing. Let's do it proper ways. So we have that on our mobile phones today. We have it on most of the mainstream computers today. They will look at, is that an authentic operating system? Is that an authentic firmware loading? What is the next step? The firmware will load the operating system. The firmware will have an opinion about the operating system. All of that is monitored by certain components in the hardware, like the TPM or secure execution environment. So we need probably to rely on such thing to start looking at what's going on. Is that a trusted, authentic thing running? The trustworthiness and the processes running, the thing starting up, the whole operating system or the whole function we're relying on. Once we have that, we can start implementing a fairly detailed whitelisting model. I mentioned that previously. I said you can actually start looking at the execution path of a process. Today, we have means of declaring and defining the proper execution path and say, at compile time, the compiler will put information about what kind of paths are possible in the software. You can go this way, that way, that way. If you do anything else, then it's not valid. So the processor will actually judge and validate whether this is going the right direction or not. And then if not, then it will terminate. We need to go back to the fail-safe state, right? Once again. So I guess it's an extreme model of whitelisting is what we should start looking at. We can do that with mainstream operating systems today. You can do that like with Windows or other operating systems. Tell, hey, only these binaries are fine to run on the system. You cannot run any other binaries. And if the binary does something unexpected, that will be terminated.
Okay.
So that was in Windows, it's called application guard system. So all of a sudden you start executing instructions that doesn't exist in what the compiler has said this is the execution path as we know about it for this application, because at compile time it will give you that picture, right? So then it's a matter of a type of action we need to conduct on that process. So as said, because of the lack of the detection capability, we turn from IDS, IPS trying to figure out what's bad going on in the system into, okay, this is the only good that can go on the system. And then there should be as far as, I mean, we don't have that type of very complex, like monolith complex system in the vehicles, right? As far as I understand, there are small components more or less doing whatever they are instructed to do. This one is taking care about the fuel system. This one is taking care about the engine. And then there is a central unit that brings together the processing. So as far as we can whitelist what the small units are doing, we will probably be doing very good, because the more complex central unit maybe can be put aside and then the car will still function.
Well, in theory, yes, I agree with you.
Yeah.
What I have seen is, when automotive software development started, probably it was 30 years ago, the person who wrote down the first line of code, you probably don't even find him in the company.
No.
You'd be lucky if he's still alive, yeah? So, and it developed historically. Yeah. And oftentimes, if you do the system call graph, if you don't draw an automata, it is messy. It is heavily messy. And to do a check on if it is within the right system call or not will be computationally, as you rightly mentioned, those computers are not very powerful computers. They're microchips with limited capabilities. Will be a challenge. However, I like your extreme whitelisting approach, and this is probably one way to solve or build a layer of defense. Right now, what we have is at least the cryptography in the software, automotive software, the standard AutoSAR. They have introduced the crypto service module. We have that module. We have the interfaces for the cryptography, so it's better than having nothing. The challenges are still, the protocols are not defined.
Exactly.
And I haven't, so far, to the best of my knowledge, I haven't seen any intrusion detection system as such for a vehicle. No. But we need one, as you rightly mentioned. And I like this whitelisting approach.
Yeah, I mean, we have IPS-based system, intrusion prevention systems, which works with the whitelisting model as well. So they will be monitoring, okay, you're doing a request for that API over that whatever protocol it is. And then our understanding of how that request should look like, it's this much of data in that field and this structure should be followed, etc. So that's another whitelisting model we should implement, or we can implement. But once again, the point you're taking here is that there should be a more sophisticated system with more power that should be looking and then judging and making all of these discussions and then taking some sort of, okay, now we do continue or not. So if we don't have that in the vehicle, then
we will need that in the future vehicle. When there are big disruptions happening. One is electrification of cars, connected vehicles, and obviously the last one, the biggest one, autonomous vehicle.
Exactly.
And in order for them to be in place, we will need such systems. So Hasain, we discussed a lot of threats and, possibilities of kind of like possible apocalypse today. What do you think is the positive thing this kind of technology is bringing up today, and how can such, IT security, cybersecurity can put a positive impact on this development in automotive?
Well, the awareness level is very nice today. I mean, given we have a lot of discussions and requirements going on with privacy, with GDPR, the NIST directive here in Europe, etc. Everything we see is around that area is very good, because we need to, or we have to implement all these measures in whatever type of IT system we're bringing together, right? So we cannot just ignore them, and then that will put pressure on the implementers of these type of things. We see that already happening in the V2X type of standards been worked on right now. So there are a lot of discussions about anonymity, for instance, integrity parts, etc. So those short-lived certificates that should be used when there is a inter-vehicle communication, etc. So we have a lot of these aspects going on. I've had some discussions with the people delivering PKI services for some of the big car manufacturers. They do have a lot of pressure from that side and want to deliver systems that stands up for those standards, right? So I would say that's something positive on the vehicle side itself. On the back-end systems, the telemetry systems and the control systems, or whatever kind of other systems we have, as there are so much more awareness about what could go wrong on big networks, I guess people will start, or hopefully people will start reacting on that once they say, okay, well, that is an integral part of our enterprise network. What if somebody can step in at that end of our enterprise network and all of a sudden pop up at the telemetry system and can control the vehicles or the fleets? So they should probably start very soon, if they are not already there, start looking at segmentation, proper segmentation. It's not just network-based segmentation, it's more of an identity-based segmentation, which is actually the thing that's going on in large enterprises, or at least recommendation-wise, start looking at your ad. Because there is one logon of some sort, a username, a password, it may be multi-factor authentication, whatever that is. If you have that in your hand, or if you're part of that session that was established using that multi-factor authentication, then you can actually control the backend system. So we need to understand the dependency chain between the regular user environment at a company and those backend systems that can control the vehicles. Is it possible if I can plant something, a software, malware, virus, whatever we can call it, on a regular computer on that network, and then from there I can make it all the way to the backend system that can control the vehicles? If that's possible for a user in that company, then that should be possible for an intruder. So we have to start working with bringing together air-gapped systems, probably specialized systems. Unless you have physical access to this workstation, it's not going to fly. So this is something we're already working with enterprises that really honor security. We start working with privilege access controls, specialized privilege access workstations, etc. And we start working with tiering models that says this is very important system, so we need to make sure that only designated admins can access that very important system. How we do that? Well, if there is an admin using a workstation to control that system, then obviously that workstation is as important as the system itself. This type of viewing systems based on what they can do, we didn't really have that before. This is something new. Start popping up 4 or 5 years ago. Start thinking into the direction of the identity. Where is that identity possible to observe? Because wherever you can observe that identity that can control that system, then that subsystem it's observed on is as important as high value asset you're declaring there. So just a simple like assessment you can do, just look at it in theory, say, hey, how do you actually manage those backend systems? What does it take for you? Okay, you step into that building, obviously, then you perform a log on somewhere on a workstation. Is it the same workstation? You will jump through 2, 4, 3, maybe 5 different systems, and then you reach the backend system. The attacker will be able to do the exact same thing. If they have enough time and enough resources to observe what's going on, learn, and do it.
All right. So I love it. I love your vision. So what I also think that technology moves really fast. I mean, the half-life of technology is getting shorter and shorter. Moore's law is getting steeper when it comes to technological advancement. However, we've seen that security solutions does not have the same pace as technology. My bet is, for the first time in history, when it comes to autonomous vehicle, we will have to have the security in place from the beginning because of so many risks that we have discussed. So that is good news for the security community.
Exactly.
What do you think?
Well, we're trying to solve one major question here, which is how much can I trust that other vehicle I'm communicating with on the road? At the far end, when we start speaking about autonomous driving vehicles, all of that, there should be a bunch of transactions going on between that one, the whatever you have in terms of systems on the road, other type of vehicles on the road, etc. So we so far being focusing on trying to solve that with classic PKI based systems, that's what we know about. That's probably the best type of key-based authentication that we can make things happening using that one, right? But I think there are some challenges there. We do have like requirements by law, GDPR, other type of directives that governs our activity. It says, hey, there is a level of anonymity that has to be granted. So just because you just talk to that vehicle, you shouldn't be able to trace it. Who's the owner, where it's coming from. You should be able to trace it to a trusted source. And that's where it should stop, right? We know that there is a difference between how we deal with that question in Europe and in the United States, for instance, because they have a requirement that law enforcement should be able to like pinpoint that vehicle, the owner, almost immediately. So that's a challenge per se. But I guess AI will probably step in there and help us. We should be able to probably soon enough develop more powerful algorithms that might be able to run on less sophisticated hardware. Let's put it that way. Maybe using mesh technology that is already enabled in these kind of systems, so the different components will start reacting with each others. Trying to make it easier to judge, okay, what's going on here? So somebody can make that part of the decision, another one makes the other part, and then they cooperate on it. Blockchain is a big thing. Almost everybody's talking about it, especially identity people are actually talking a lot of blockchains because that offers a level of anonymity, and at the same time, there is a level of authenticity and certainty about something. So you can tie it and say, we know this is an authentic thing coming from that manufacturer or that vendor. At the same time, you don't really have like the notion of knowing exactly what that thing or who that thing is, right? So there may be a way to create a flavor of that so we can identify it without the whole overhead of we need to have a certain number of anonymity certificates downloaded to a vehicle today for the V2X system. Either they should be pre-provisioned or real-time provisioned. And then, as I had part of the discussion I had a few weeks ago, people starting to find ways to make that the creation of the anonymity certificate a little bit less complicated and not requiring as much resources as it does today. By like, okay, if we can use that algorithm to do like derivation of public-private keys, is that good? Because this will not consume that much IOPS as if we do it proper ways, like generating new keys from scratch. etc. So we know that there will be such shortcuts will be taken. We want to use less computational power, etc. So maybe looking at some of these emerging technologies, that could be something to help us out with some of these questions. But as I said, there is a very high pressure on standardization. We want these things to be able to communicate to each other's, beyond the boundaries we're setting up. Like, this is not just a Western European thing. We hopefully want that if that car happens to end up in Asia, we want that car probably to be able to communicate to something, right? So we want to open up and then remove those type of borders, but at the same time we have other requirements like type of law based requirements, legal requirements, and such that might govern our activities. So I think a combination of these things, more of maybe availability of hardware that is self-aware about what's going on. We've seen this implemented in regular computers today. So it's just a matter of if we let it evolve enough times and see where we're ending up, maybe we can have a cheaper model for that one, a hardware that is aware. We can have it, we can afford having that on mobile phones. So why shouldn't we be able to have that kind of awareness on that kind of devices we have in vehicles, right? So the hardware per se, the manufacturing cost for that hardware is not so very high. Well, at the same time, we have a legacy in the vehicle industry that we've been doing things certain ways. So it's always more difficult to change the behavior than changing the technology.
Right, and also this is the comparison I often hear. The hardware that we use in mobile phone and the hardware that we use in the car, the difference is one, longevity, and the second is the safety requirement, the safety requirement for it to be reliable. Exactly. So that makes it much more difficult because a lifespan of a cell phone is 2-3 years, and a lifespan of a car is, we're talking about 20 years.
So what if we have a cluster of, in reliability terms, if one system is failing, you can push the on button on the other system.
Right.
If it is expected to behave similarly, right? Right. So that's one of the building basics for reliable systems. So why not start looking at that we have sort of disposable components, maybe.
That could
we know they have a lifespan of 3 years, so why not, we use that one until we see signs of failure, and then we switch over to the next one that is ready.
It's again a cost question.
Exactly.
It's a cost question, but very interesting way to look at problems. That's why I like it when I hear new perspectives. So I would wrap it up. The discussion, it's been really stimulating. We talked about the various aspects of vulnerabilities and threats in the automotive industry. And you mentioned a lot of your experiences. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to Matrix. Hasain, it was a pleasure.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
In this podcast show, we bring in the industry leaders and experts in the automotive domain to share their experiences along their journey. The mission of our podcast is to start a dialogue that will allow us to understand the development of automotive industry and where the automotive industry is going. You can ask questions to our guests directly. Just send us an email to podcast@matrix.de. We'll schedule a call with you during the recording and you'll be part of our show. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss any new episodes. Please share this video to help others get enlightened as well, and that would mean a great deal to us. See you in the next episode.